age of cynicism. When I was young, faced with washing dishes or some other such chore, my siblings and I would wonder when science would catch science fiction, and our home would function like the Jetsons, where everything was automated awesomeness. In the decades since then, our world does indeed resemble the dreams of yesterday's science fiction, but it has also traveled further into dystopia. As one columnist wrote, in contrast to science fiction tales set in fantastical futures on distant planets, dystopian novels take the anxieties of people on Earth and amplify them. With instant global interconnectedness alerting us to all forms of tragedy and conflict, our society appears to have defaulted either to resigned despair or distracted indifference. When regularly our leaders disappoint us by their actions and their human flaws are flouted and magnified due to our relentless and merciless scrutiny, it's easy to see why many have come to a collective understanding that no one can stand with a message of hope. Once a small genre of fiction literature, dystopian-themed novels, games, and movies seem now to be the predominant world in which entertainment takes place, and increasingly the real world as well. Hope rather than dystopia is the fiction of our day. What happened? In the process of avoiding the anxiety of a big brother governmental takeover like in George Orwell's 1984, society instead followed Neil Postman's prediction that we would amuse ourselves to death. And with anxiety and amusement gone, only cynicism remains. In 2015, composer Mohammad Fairouz wrote, "The age of anxiety has given way to the age of cynicism. Among my generation, cynicism is no longer a bad word. It's being celebrated, and it is often mistaken for intelligence." The age of cynicism, Fairouz continues, is where it is better to be wry and distrustful than to be open and trusting. Louis Navia, in his critical study of classical cynicism, explains that in modern times a cynical person is someone who rejects ethical values and ideals and who reacts skeptically and sarcastically to even the most innocent and well-intentioned human actions. For such a person, most if not all human activities are suspect and unworthy of trust, since no one, according to the cynic, ever seeks or pursues anything except for the specific yet often secret purpose of benefiting himself. For the cynic, accordingly, hypocrisy and deceitfulness, primitive selfishness and unbounded egotism, and gross materialism and disguised ruthlessness are the hidden characteristics of all human behavior. Hence the cynic does not believe in ideals or lofty aspirations, which are in his mind only linguistic and behavioral games promoted for the purpose of manipulating and duping people, or ways to hide the enormous state of confusion that permeates the average human consciousness. In addition to these active characteristics of a cynical age, I think there are passive characteristics as well. As we have seen, active cynicism is essentially a functional, if not actual, atheism, where the ultimate end is despair and hopelessness. Passive cynicism is subtler, but perhaps more common. Passive cynicism is more of an idle indifference to the world and the people in it. Here the focus is more on oneself, and the ultimate end is elusive or even ignored, often reflected in the common vernacular of the day, whatever. The passive cynic is like the infamous literary figure Don Quixote, who is impulsive, acts without thought to consequence, and can spend time and energy fighting imagined enemies or tilting at windmills. The passive cynic is a day trader, only focusing on or reacting to the temporal, the shiny, or the loud. In either case, the notion of biblical hope is scoffed at or ignored. However, Christians should take heed, for we, as though living in this world, are prone to bend toward it. Often the pull toward cynicism is easier to follow than the struggle to resist. Sarcasm comes too easy, complaining is default small talk, and despair can mark us more than joy. We might refer to the evangelical cynic to describe the active voice, and the evangelical stoic to describe the passive. How are we as Christians to live in such times? This book is my attempt to answer that question. But first, I want to assert, right into the jungle of cynicism that so easily entangles, that mere hope lives. Mere hope lives. Frodo lives. While traveling a New York subway or the sidewalks of London in the 1960s, you might have come across this exclamation, written in chalk or something more permanent, but like most passers-by, you would not have known what it meant. Following the publication of J.R.